Good morning. Welcome to the November meeting. First item of business are public speakers. I understand we have a list of 4 or 5. Steve, call the first one.
First speaker is Mary Bowden.
Mr. Bowden?
Mary Bowden.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I used to come here and got here an hour and a half early and stand out in line. There'd be 50 people outside and I'd be 25th. I got there this morning. I was the only one out there, and up until 9 o'clock there was all 3 of us. What that says is that the problems that we used to come here and discuss are getting discussed and solved before we have to come here and complain. So you've done an excellent job in changing the way these people all think and how they solve problems. So that the problems we had to come up, that these other people came up here and they're all being solved. I can't remember what the other stuff. Oh.
Believe me, there are more problems.
The change that was done by Tom about closing down the subways for 5 days and cleaning them was phenomenal. It was a change in the way people think. And it cleaned out 40 years worth of garbage that plugged all the sewers so that when the water went down, they drained. That's leadership. That's the kind of leadership that needs to be extended in a couple of other places. I spoke yesterday at the New Jersey Turnpike. Monday I spoke here at Bridges and Tunnels. Monday night I spoke at the Westchester County Board of Legislators. A couple of weeks ago I spoke at the Port Authority meeting. That's on the record. And what I put into the record and what I will put into the record and tie together is that Bridges and Tunnels are using signs that are not meeting standard, that they are using road lines that are not meeting standard, and I'm repeating all of this as prior notification that if when someone has an accident, that they can come back and say you have been notified, and all of the organizations, I'm not picking on you in particular, but you have a camera up there. My name is Murray Bowden. And I'm putting you on notice that, one, you're creating a safety hazard, especially at the Henry Hudson Bridge where they failed to remove toll booths that will never be used again. And when there is an accident there, and there will be, in today's paper were full-page ads asking for lawyers for accidents. It's cheaper to do it right. It's safer to do it right. So when somebody says, you know, we're interested in public safety, I want to see it exercised that way.
Could you wrap up, please, Mr. Bowden?
I'm about wrapped up. Most important was to thank the way you're doing things in a new way and to go on a record and create a public record of what needs to be changed. Thank you.
Sir, thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. X. He'll be followed by Matt Shokin. Shokin?
As I said before, Loda, you should have canceled the public hearing. You should have postponed the public hearings due to the bad weather and mainly because of Hurricane Sandy. If you remember, 3 weeks ago today, we had a snowstorm. You postponed one public hearing due to Law and Railroad suspension service. Yet you held the other in Brooklyn. You had inadequate speakers and you had 2 intermissions. In my borough and in Queens, you had 3 intermissions for the same reason. Okay? And I said before, if you had advertised the public hearings in a timely manner, you would have gotten a larger attendance. So let me re-innovate. First, you displayed the flyer at 3 Stone Street. On the same day, when I first got it, the day I got it, I logged into the website and asked you to put my name on the speaking list. At a later date, I received an email letter from one of your employees, possibly Andrew Pop, saying you could pre-register, but you must use the online registration form. You didn't mention the online registration form to begin with. You didn't mention it before time to begin with. That's unacceptable. Okay? November 8th, you were supposed to hold a public hearing at 3 Stone Street between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. You couldn't do that due to Hurricane Sandy. So what did you do? Rather than postpone that public hearing, you held it anyway. You didn't hold it there, but you held it elsewhere. You held it at 180 Livingston Street between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. And I discovered that while I was on the website, which is more outrageous. This is how you treat the public. There's no excuse for that. And by the way, I have something for you. Okay? Someone get that to him for me? Yeah, but make sure he gets that. Okay, I mentioned that to you. What I'm about to give you, I mentioned that to you. And I just want one thing. I'm praying, and it is from this point on, that the MTA PD cops don't cancel or I should deactivate my reduced fare Metro card because they can't find me. I mentioned that to you at one of those public hearings. I definitely didn't appreciate that. So he'll give that to you. You'll know what that is. But I'm definitely not going to tolerate that. You know, it's aggravating enough they mistreated me here 347 Madison. No, I'm definitely not going to tolerate them cancel my reduced fare Metro card for, just...
Can you wrap it up, please, Mr. X?
I'm wrapping up now, but I'm definitely not going to tolerate that. That's totally unacceptable.
Thank you. Matt Shocken. He'll be followed by Joseph Samarco.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think it was fair to take away people's unlimited rides during Hurricane Sandy. Yes, the subways and buses did shut down the night before the storm, but that didn't give the MTA the right to take away passengers' fares once the system came back up, but only with limited service. Board member Andrew Albert is in his right mind, almost demanding that anyone who tried to use the subway, at least after the hurricane, should get their days reinstated. I hope that the board sides with Andrew on this matter when he brings it up at the meeting. Thanks for your time this morning, folks.
Thank you. Mr. Samarco. He'll be followed by the final speaker, Eric Legier.
Good morning, board members. My name is Joe Samarco. I'm the TWU Local 100 representative. I'm here to speak about the first transit bid that was recently lost to a Global Contract Services. TWU Local 100 has been representing the members, currently 685 members at First Transit since 2002. These members are experienced professionals. They do their job well. It's unfortunate about what happened with First Transit, but I will say I'm glad to hear that it's decided to keep that work in the city and those tax monies in the community. I would hope that the new company, Global Contract Services, would look at these experienced workers and keep them on board, and hope that they make the right call. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final speaker, Eric Legier.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My name is Eric Legier. I'm a project coordinator for NIPERG at Brooklyn College. We also head up the Strap Hangers campaign. Today, I'm here to speak on behalf of my students at Brooklyn College. And one of the looming fears over students is, of course, the proposed fare hike in the 4 different scenarios. I'd also like to speak for myself as a citizen and avid user, and I'd like to first address what we all know is common fact. This is the greatest transit system in the country. I'm proud to do that. I often remember that in the months like this, because I'm from upstate New York, where I don't have to scrape ice off a car anymore, and I can just get on a train. But back to the fare hikes. As someone who works on a pretty tight budget, I generally see the unlimited ride as a sunk cost for transportation, $104 a month. I don't like having to do the math with how many different fares or rides I'm going to be taking, and so the value in that is that I might pay a little bit extra. But if the proposed cuts go up to $125, I'm going to be forced to more or less make up an algorithm in my head for the fares that I'm riding. And I also speak for the students who are on a very, very tight budget, that, you know, shifting these costs onto the riders is something that we can't keep repeating. It's been done over and over again. So I'm calling on the board to take a more aggressive manner to approach Albany to cover the deficit in the operating budget. And I also like to commend your efforts for looking to federal grants and also measures to make sure that riders are paying for bus fares. Almost every single time I ride a bus, I see someone sneak in the back door. A lot of that can be covered by select bus service, which I would like to also tell the board to start working on, specifically in Brooklyn. Oftentimes, if there's like 10 more stops, I find myself walking it because the bus is going so slow. It's to the point where I can almost walk faster than the bus. My name is Eric Laguerre, project coordinator for NYPIRG. I speak for the students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the public comment period.
Good morning, and again, welcome to the November 2012 meeting of the MTA Board. As you all know, this is our first meeting since we postponed our meeting in October due to Hurricane Sandy. And I have to tell you, I can't be more proud of the MTA and the MTA family as I am today and have been through this entire process and how they handled the storm. As you know, it was by far the worst disaster ever to hit our system, but let's look at some of the results. We had buses up and running in less than 7 hours after the storm. 9 hours after that, our buses were at full schedule. Commuter trains, Long Island Railroad and Metro North, were running 24 hours, while limited, but 24 hours after we were hit by Sandy. Subways were back 36 hours after the storm, and a lot of that time was spent in that 36 hours just waiting for power to come back because we were ready to go even before that. Our response was a direct result of all of the changes that have been made at the MTA over the last couple of years. It was a direct result of good planning, great preparation, and unbelievable implementation. And it was also a true partnership between our labor, our union labor, and our management. Our frontline workers were busy pumping water out of the system even before the storm was over, cleaning switches and relays, removing down trees, checking on our bridges, working all throughout the night. Even our finance and risk management staffs were busy compiling data to provide to FEMA so that we could be the first in with our reimbursement. Our media office and our marketing and communication staff, they were absolutely on full court press. We used Twitter and Facebook and Flickr, MTA.info, our website, traditional press releases, local, national news, radio, television, you name it. You had to actively avoid the media not to know what was going on at the MTA. Our employees did this all while facing, however, the same challenges that all New Yorkers faced. Their homes, many of them were damaged. Many of them had lost power. Their families needed them while they were here working, but they all understood what their jobs required them to do. They were here, risking their lives, leaving loved ones at home for days and even weeks, all with one goal in mind, and a very important goal: serving the MTA customers and bringing our region and our economy back. Without them, without our workers, this would not happen. Overall, I think the storm and our response revealed two very fundamental things about New York and the MTA. I've said this over and over again. Our transit system, our entire transportation system, is the circulatory system, or the lifeblood, the veins and the arteries of New York's economy. After Irene and now Sandy, it couldn't be more clear what happens to New York when the MTA doesn't work. Everything comes to a complete halt. The storm also proved something that I've been advocating to anyone who will listen to me over the past year. The MTA is a far leaner, more efficient, more competent organization than most people give us credit for. So before we move on again, I just want to say one thing to all of the MTA employees who worked nonstop during the storm. Thank you, and thank you very much. You brought our region back an unbelievable amount of time, and you should be very, very proud of this. One of the things that I would like to inform the board of, that we have started a separate nonprofit, a 501c3 corporation that's been established to help MTA employees and their families who were victims of Sandy and for other disasters, God forbid they come again. Again, I want to say how proud I am to be part of the MTA family. Thank you. The minutes of the September meeting have been...
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman?
Mr. Capelli.
Mr. Chairman, I think that it's appropriate that this board formally congratulate the chair, his staff, the agency presidents and their staffs, and all of our line employees for bringing honor to this agency from the public during this crisis while the nation was watching. And so I would ask that this board formally thank you and the aforementioned for your service during this extraordinarily difficult time, as you've just so eloquently noted, the conditions that took place and the efforts that took place. And I move that as a resolution of this board.
All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, Alan. I would be remiss as I'm looking out at the generals and admirals that run the MTA, and I have to thank Tom Prendergast, who reminds me more of Admiral Nimitz than of any general I've ever met, who got more done in less amount of time than I've ever seen possible, as did Nimitz. Followed by Darrell Irick, who's unfortunately can't be here today, as president of MTA Bus, as you all know. Howard Permit, president of Metro North, as well as Helena Williams, president of Long Island Railroad. Jim Farrar, who had some tunnels completely covered with water, who kept telling me over and over again, I don't know when they're going to get open, but he did it in great time and in great fashion. And Dr. Michael Harandachando, who is president of Capital Construction. These leaders are the ones who deserve all the credit for getting it done. It's their planning, it's their implementation that got it done. Thank you all. Now for the minutes of the September meeting. They've been distributed to all the members. Are there any comments? Are there any corrections or edits? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. So moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. And now I'm happy to turn the floor over to Andrew Saul, Chairman of the Finance Committee. Andrew?
Okay, thank you, Joe. There are 3 MTA headquarter action items this month. Number 1, the first action item is to approve a supplemental resolution and associate actions authorizing the issuance of bonds in an aggregate principal amount necessary to provide net proceeds, exclusive of premiums, sufficient to fund up to $500 million of capital projects of the transit, bus, and commuter systems. This action item also authorizes the chairman and chief executive officer, the vice chairman, the chair of the Finance Committee, the chief financial officer of MTA, and the director of finance of MTA to take such actions and to execute and deliver such documents as may be necessary or desirable to effectuate this transaction. This resolution and associate actions are described on page 30 to 42 in the materials distributed for this meeting. The second action item is to authorize actions necessary for the extension of MTA's insurance coverage for owner-controlled insurance program for the East Side Access Project. These actions are described on pages 43 and 44 in the materials distributed for this meeting. The third action item is to approve MTA and TBTA reimbursement resolutions, which were distributed separately and are required by federal tax law to preserve the ability to finance certain capital projects on a tax-exempt basis. I move these actions, Joe.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Murdo.
I would ask to be recused from vote on the insurance item.
So noted. Thank you. Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries with the notation regarding Mr. Myrtle. Okay.
Joe, there are 10 competitive procurement actions in the total amount of $6.3 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are no non-competitive procurements or ratifications. There are 8 real estate action items. 7 of these items are described on pages 56 to 71 in the materials distributed for this meeting. The 8th item for the Long Island Railroad's John D. Camerer West Side Yard is described in a staff summary that was distributed separately. The committee recommends these real estate items, and I move them.
Do you have a second?
Mr. Chairman,
Second.
may I be
Second.
recused on the last item on page 56?
Duly noted. Noted.
Thank you.
Okay.
Second.
Seconded. Item has been seconded. Are there any other questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries.
Joe, that concludes the finance report.
Thank you, Andrew, very, very much. And now a report from my good friend Mark LeBeau. Mark?
The Transit Committee met on Monday and reports the following. There is one item to approve the use of an expedited change order procedure for the R179 train procurement with Bombardier. The committee recommends this item, and I move it.
Second. Item has been seconded. Any questions or comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are 19 procurement actions totaling $54.9 million. There are 5 non-competitive procurements for MTA New York City Transit in the total amount of $30 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Item has been seconded. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are 6 competitive procurements, 4 for MTA New York City Transit and 2 for MTA Capital Construction Company in the total amount of $14.4 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Item has been seconded. Any questions or comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries.
There are 8 ratifications, 3 for MTA New York City Transit and 5 for the MTA Capital Construction Company in the total amount of $10.5 million. The committee recommends these ratifications, and I move them.
Item has been seconded. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries.
This concludes transit.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. I chaired this month's meeting of the Bus Operations Committee. There's one non-competitive procurement in the amount of $7 million. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it. Second. Item has been seconded. Are there any questions or comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. There were 5 competitive procurements in the total amount of $165.6 million. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it. Recommends these procurements, and I move it. The item has been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. There are no ratifications, and this concludes the Bus Operations Committee's report. Now turn it over to the co-chairman of the Metro North LIR Committee, Mitch Pally. Mitch?
Chairman, there are 2 action items for Metro North Railroad. The first item is to approve a contract to accept $300,000 of congestion mitigation air quality grant funds from the New York State Department of Transportation to support connecting services. This item is described on page 118 in the materials distributed. The second item is to authorize 1 or more public hearings with regard to setting fares for the new West Haven station on the New Haven line. This item is described on pages 119 to 120 in the materials distributed. The committee recommends these items, and I move them.
Second. Item has been seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are 33 procurement actions in the total amount of $62.34 million. There are 4 non-competitive procurements, 2 for Long Island Railroad and 2 for Metro North Railroad in the total amount of $3.87 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second.
Item has been seconded. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are 26 competitive procurements, 7 for Long Island Railroad, 15 for Metro North Railroad, and 4 for MTA Capital Construction, in the total amount of $51.29 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Seconded. Item has been seconded. Any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are 3 ratifications for MTA Capital Construction in the total amount of $7.2 million. The committee recommends these ratifications, and I move them.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Item has been seconded. Yes, Mr. Myrtle.
Chairman, I would ask to be recused from the second ratification item.
Okay, duly noted. Duly noted. Second ratification item. Any other questions or comments? There, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries.
Thank you. This completes the report.
Thank you. And now to Commissioner Alan Capelli, who will present the report of Bridges and Tunnels. Alan?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Bridges and Tunnels Committee met this month to report the following. One action item to authorize an agreement with the New York State Department of Transportation to provide improvements to the Gowanus Expressway approach to the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. The item is described on pages 168 and 169 in the materials distributed for this meeting. The committee recommends this item, and I move it.
I'll second that. Any questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are 2 non-competitive procurements in the amount of $327,828. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second.
Items been seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are also 7 competitive procurements in the total amount of $7.5 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second.
Item has been seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are no ratifications. This concludes the Bridge and Tunnels Committee report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now I turn the floor over to MTA Chief Financial Officer Bob Ferran, who's going to present the November financial plan. This is the process that began last July with the presentation of the preliminary 2013 budget and the 4-year financial plan. Bob's now going to update us on the plan, will present us with the final proposed 2013 budget. We will receive a review of the budget today, and we will discuss it over the next month, and we will be approving the 2013 budget and the financial plan at our next meeting in December. Bob?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As the chairman said, we're going to discuss the November financial plan 2013 to 2016. And what this encompasses is an estimate of our 2012 actual results, the proposed 2013 budget, and a financial plan projections through 2016. Now, since July 2010, we presented to you 6 financial plans, 3 in July and 3 in November. And each of those plans has been consistent, disciplined, and totally transparent. What we want to do is first review the key elements of each plan. In each, we've had continuous, significant annual recurring cost cutting. We promised you and we put in no budget-driven service reductions. We have 3 years of net zero union wage growth, and I should point out that for non-represented, non-union workers, we're now finishing our 4th year without any wage increases. We continue the biennial fare and toll increases as planned. And another point to make is we have not used fare and tolls as a plug figure whenever we've had unfavorable financial developments. The numbers that we put in the plan are the numbers that we're continuing to live by. And finally, we've tried to increase our liquidity while addressing long-term health, pension, and debt service vulnerabilities. So this is what we presented in July. In 2012, we were projecting a $47 million operating cash balance. And as you know, we take that operating cash balance and roll it into the next year, where we were projecting a slight deficit of about $1 million, resulting in an operating cash balance of $46 million projected for 2013. That then rolls over into 2014 to reduce the deficit that we had down to $129 million. We're projecting a deficit at that time of $14 million in 2015, and in 2016, $231 $1 million, balanced through 2013 and with manageable out-year deficits in the later years. Well, what's happened since the July plan? We've had favorable changes and we've had unfavorable changes. Favorably, lower debt service expenses, additional paratransit savings, lower agency spending, and this is both real spending and timing, and higher revenues, and higher net subsidies. Real estate revenues are coming in about $30 million higher than we expected. Petroleum business taxes less, but net we're still up. Unfavorable changes, higher health and welfare cost, higher overtime expenses, an increase in our electric power cost, and a payroll cash flow adjustment in 2014. And let me explain this. We have biweekly payroll periods. And when you have biweekly payroll periods, every 11th year, you're going to have a 27th payroll within a year. And after the July plan, we saw that we had not included the 27th payroll period in 2014. That's now been corrected, and so that's an adjustment. Net, take all of these together, and there was a slight improvement to our financial position. But then Sandy came along, and the impact of Sandy has been significant. While we're still calculating and we're still doing the estimates on Sandy-related losses, it's still too early to give anything other than highly provisional estimates. But the estimates that we do have are basically $5 billion, slightly north of it. Infrastructure damage, about $4.75 billion. Operating losses of about $268 million. $124 million of that is lost revenue. $144 million of that is extra expenses incurred. Now, we expect that the losses will be covered by a combination of insurance, federal programs, including FEMA, and also MTA resources. On the infrastructure damage, after insurance, which we have $1.075 billion of maximum coverage, and standard FEMA reimbursement, which is about 75%, we estimate that we could be exposed for as much as $950 million of infrastructure damage that we will have to fund. On the operating loss side, we anticipate significant recoveries from both business interruption and extra expense insurance coverage and from FEMA. And while we do expect that we're going to receive advances from our insurance companies and the federal government, final settlement on all these claims that we submit could take 2 to 3 years. Meanwhile, our operating losses are hitting us in this year's 2012 budget, and we will be making multi-year infrastructure investments immediately, and we'll continue to make those, and so bridge loan financing will be necessary until we can receive reimbursement. Now, the impact is going to span multiple years. So let's look first at just 2012. We do expect that we will close 2012 on a self-sustaining basis, which is our statutory requirement. And here's what we'll do. In July, we were projecting a year-end cash balance of $47 million. We then had the $268 million loss for Sandy. Agency underspending that I referenced earlier, both real and timing, and also higher operating revenues, gives us $51 million of favorable benefit. Debt service savings of $36 million helps to address the loss. The net subsidy increase of $18 million and $4 million other benefits reduced the total expected loss for 2012 to $112 million. Now, you know we have a general reserve, and that general reserve is for the unexpected and emergencies. So we are proposing to take the remaining balance of the general reserve, $63 million, and apply it against this loss. Also, we are planning an internal loan of $75 million. We will take money out of our OPEB account. That's other post-employment benefit monies. These are monies that we have been setting aside to pay for retiree health care costs before we put them into a trust fund. So that money is available to us, and we have in the past, when necessary, borrowed it on a temporary basis and subsequently repaid it. So the plan here is to borrow $75 million, repay that no later than 2015, at which time the money will be put into the trust. All totaled, that gives us a November projected year-end cash balance of $26 million. We do expect reimbursement between 2013 and 2015. FEMA has said that they will reimburse 100% of eligible cost incurred through November 14th. So we are looking to that. And also, as I said earlier, our business interruption extra expense insurance is anticipated to cover a substantial portion of the remaining losses. But what about 2013 and beyond? Well, the infrastructure losses will require external borrowing, and that's going to increase our debt service cost. So let me give you an illustration of the impact. Assuming that we need to borrow $2.9 billion of anticipation notes in 2013 and another $1.9 billion of anticipation notes in 2014, our debt service cost would increase by $29 million in 2013 and then $48 million a year in 14 and 15 until such notes are repaid either from insurance proceeds, the federal reimbursement, or the proceeds of bonds to take out those notes. Assuming that we need to sell $950 million of 30-year bonds issued in 2016 to take out $950 million worth of anticipation notes that were not repaid from insurance or federal reimbursement, our debt service cost will go up to $62 million. It will go up by $62 million a year. Now, we are proposing additional cost cutting to offset the additional debt service in the financial plan. These would be additional MTA efficiency targets, cost cutting targets, and it would be $25 million in 2013, $50 million in 2014, going to $75 million in additional cuts in 2015. At this time, those cuts are unidentified. We will have to go through our books, our records, our accounts to see where we can save money, but that's the target that we've set, and that's what we will hit. Now let's talk about significant elements in the November plan. Clearly, we just talked about that the November plan will fund the operating and financing costs associated with Sandy through these unidentified cost reductions. But importantly, this November plan continues to retain the MTA service investments that were announced in July that improve coverage both to our existing markets and deliver service to new markets. We also are including $250 million annually beginning in 2015 in support of the 2015 to 2019 capital program. This is a down payment, if you will, on our next capital program that we're currently working on. We expect that that capital program will be just as large as the current capital program we're in and require significant additional resources. We trust that those resources will be backed up and supported by additional revenues coming from Albany. But we do need to make sure we have monies to continue programs, and this $250 million will do it. Now, where is the $250 coming from? Well, it's being funded by the savings that we've had from the refunding program that we put forth in place this year, which was significant, and also from re-estimates of our interest rates and cash flow requirements on all of our borrowing. We're increasing the general reserve each year, and we're also increasing our OPEB contributions each year. And then there's three key elements here that we will maintain. Increasing the annual recurring savings targets. Again, every year we have targeted over $1.2 billion by 2016. We're continuing the 3 years of net zero wage growth for our non-union employees, our represented employees rather, and then the 2013 and 2015 fare and toll increases consistent with what we presented in July pre-Sandy. We are not changing what we were asking to be raised from fare and tolls in 2013 and 2015. Now, let's see how these action items are used to address the deficits that we have. This November plan continues to use those same building blocks. These are the deficits which we would be facing had we not taken any actions to date or were not taking actions prospectively. The 2013 deficit is projected to be about $1.4 billion, and that increases every year till the time you get to 2016, and it's a $2.7 billion deficit. Across this time frame, it's more than $8 billion of deficits that we had to address. So let's look at each of the actions that we're taking, the savings initiatives, the net zero labor initiative, and also the 13 and 15 fare and toll increases, and see what they contribute individually and collectively to addressing these deficits. Well, first with the savings initiatives. We will achieve about $809 million worth of savings, recurring savings, in 2013. And you can see that that increases each and every year until you're above $1.2 billion projected by 2016. And you can see how that reduces the deficit in red at the top of the table to 569 up to $1,529. That's more than $4 billion of cost cutting to take place during this 4-year period. And that represents 50% of the deficit. So more than 50% of the projected deficit will be addressed by the cost cutting that the MTA is doing. The net labor, 3 zeros, you can see that that gives a $227 million benefit in 2013. That increases until the time you get to 2016, and it's $309 million of benefit. In total, that's a little over $1.1 billion, or about 14% of the deficit. The fare and toll increase in 2013. Again, we're planning on it going into effect on March 1st, so we'll get 10 months of that benefit. That would be $382 million in 2013. Gives us a slight cash balance of $40 million, which again will be rolled over to address the deficit in 2014. In 2014, we have a full year of that fare and toll increase of $465, and then it increases as ridership increases in its effect. That gives us about $1.8 billion worth of benefit, or about 22% of the deficit. And then next, the 2015 fare and toll increase. Again, going into effect on March 1st, 10 months of that would give us $425 million, with a full year effect in 2016, $515 million. That is about 11% of the deficit. So to kind of summarize, with these actions that we're proposing, we're taking over $8 billion worth of deficit, and we're reducing it down to a remaining deficit of about $333 million, 4% more that we have to achieve. And talk about the relative contributions. Cost cutting, paying for 50% of it. We're asking fare and toll increases to pay for about 33% of it, and we're asking for concessions from labor to pay for roughly 14% of it. Now, when I look at a chart like this, it begs the question of what's going on, and why are these deficits just continuing to increase? Well, here's our problem. Non-discretionary expenses are increasing a lot faster than both inflation and our discretionary expenses. The left side of this table shows what our 2011 actual expenses were and what our 2012 expenses are forecast to be. And we compare those first against CPI, or inflation, which is projected to be 1.8%. Well, discretionary expenses, which are primarily payroll and other than personal service, in fact, when you adjust for certain mandatory or regulatory things, is actually down 2012 versus 2011 by approximately 1%. But on the non-discretionary side, it's a completely different story. Pensions between 11 and 12 projected to go up almost 24%. Employee and retiree health care, 7.2%. Energy, 3.6%. Paratransit, more than 5%. And debt service, more than 7%. And when you look at the time frame of 2011 to 2016, it may not be as dramatic in all cases, but it tells the same story. We're forecasting CPI, or inflation, to be 1.7%. We have discretionary expenses that we will have less than that, less than 1%. Non-discretionary expenses, pensions, approaching 7%, health care and retiree and employee health care in excess of 9%, energy 5.3%, paratransit 7.2%, and debt service 7.6%. But it's not just the rapid growth of these non-discretionary costs that are driving the deficits. It's the absolute dollars involved here. Non-discretionary costs are almost 50% of our operating budget. So let's take a look at what the dollars really mean. In 2012, we looked at the increase in just those 5 categories of expenses over what they were in 2011. So in 2012, we expect that those 5 categories of expenses will be $523 million higher than they were in 2011. In 2013, we expect that they will be almost $1 billion higher, $985 million, than they were in 2011. And the fare and toll increase that we're putting in place is generating $382 million, significantly less than just that one portion of our operating budget. A similar picture. In 2014, we expect that those expenses will be $1.3 billion higher than they were in 2011. And with a full fare and toll increase, we'll generate $465 million of incremental revenues. When you get to 2015, those costs are expected to be $1.7 billion higher than they were in 2011. And with the 15 fare and toll increase kicking in, net revenue, incremental revenues, about $900 million, but still falling behind in terms of the non-discretionary expense growth. And then when you look at it cumulatively over these 4 years, the increase in non-discretionary expenses is almost $4.6 billion more than it was in 2011. And the fare and toll increases are only $1.7 billion higher than the revenues we were receiving in 2011. So basically, fare and toll increases that we plan for 13 to 15 are covering only 38% of our non-discretionary expenses. So where are we at this time? Well, you know, we've been making progress in trying to address the deficits that are out there, and we're trying to reduce the deficits each and every time we present a plan. But Sandy did knock us back. And but for the unidentified additional targets that we have for cuts, the $25 million in 13, the $50 million in 14, the $75 million additional cuts in 15, it would be a much uglier picture. But basically, those cuts, and we will achieve them, offset most of the projected cost of Sandy. So what we have is, in the first 2 years, 12 and 13, just a slight worsening of our cash balance, but an improvement in our deficit in 2014, slight increase in 15, and basically a wash in 16. The total deficits go from $374 million in the July plan to about $333 million in the November plan. As I said, we've tried to be very consistent in each of our plans. The last 6 plans have followed the same model, the same strategy, and we think it works, and we're committed to continue to do it. But inherent in those plans are certain risks. And now we've got the risk of federal support, both for disaster relief and also ongoing support to our capital program, given the fiscal cliff that we've all read so much about and heard so much about in the press. There's economic uncertainty. We were starting to see some improvement in our regional economy, and then Sandy hit. And we know that on the short term, it is not going to be helpful. What the longer term implications are, we'll have to wait and see. The national economy continues to remain weak. We continue to expect the receipt of the PMT or comparable revenues. If the PMT is not the tax that the people want to pay, we're agnostic. But we're not indifferent to the amount of revenues that we need. We need this revenue if we're going to be able to address the ongoing cost of the system. We have to have successful execution of our financial plan. And again, those 3 key components of achieving net zero labor settlements, continued cost reductions, and the biennial fare and toll increases in 13 and 15. We have vulnerabilities that go well beyond this financial plan. These are things that we're going to have to address year in, year out, one plan after the other. And now one that we've added is the casualty risk to the system. I think we've all seen the devastation and the damage that could be caused by natural disasters and the cost necessary to recover from them. We also need the ability to fund mitigation investments so that we can avoid some of these the damages. It's the employee and retiree health care costs that continue to grow. We've got to be able to control those. On pensions, it's both the growing liability and it's the ability to achieve higher investment returns to offset the need for further contributions to the level that we've been required. And finally, we need to continue to build and protect critical financial reserves. We have been building up our financial reserves because we were able to address the 2012 Sandy operating losses without having to raise revenues or cut costs further. We had the resources to handle it, The monies were there for that purpose, and so we need to make sure that we continue to protect that. Before I turn it over to open it up for questions, there is another staff summary and board action that's requested, and it was handed out earlier. And this is authorization to expend available funds for Hurricane Sandy restoration and adoption of related MTA and TBT reimbursement resolutions for federal tax purposes. We have been and will continue to spend monies out of our available resources, both for operating and capital costs related to Sandy. What this will do, if you pass these, approve the staff summary and pass the resolutions, will be to permit us to continue to borrow tax exempt to reimburse ourselves for some of these costs as permitted under IRS tax code. But this is an action item that will be presented to you for vote after we finish our Q&A period. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Robert. If we could put on the lights and the board for asking questions. Jeff?
Just a few questions and maybe a quick comment. Bob, your last comment on the PMT, us being agnostic as to whether it's the payroll mobility tax or some other tax, as long as it's a comparable revenue, I hope that our position includes not only being comparable in size, but comparable in stability and in deference to not an annual appropriation every single year, as we've been subject to in the past.
Absolutely.
Second, and this is really a question, I thought I saw somewhere early on, and I've always been sensitive, as you know, to how we fund our capital plan. I think you mentioned, that we've saved 200, or we can contribute to the next capital plan an increase of $250 million a year just in debt service savings?
Yes. What that breaks down to is we have a significant amount of refunding savings that we've incurred, and frankly, we've tried to bank it for that purpose, 2015 and beyond. We are now projecting significantly lower interest rates than what we had built in prior capital programs. And our cash flow requirements, partially from the rebaselining of East Side Access, is pushing some of our expenditure needs farther out. Right. My position has always been when we can have savings on capital items, we should reinvest that money back into capital items because we know we're always strained and stressed to meet our capital needs. And so that's what we're really trying to do, is we're saying we have savings that we're generating, and let's reinvest that back into the capital program.
So is that $250 million a year in debt service savings that you're saying should go to pay-as-you-go, or is added to our debt service budget to support a much larger program?
What that would be is, if we use that for additional debt, we could sell another $3.5 billion roughly of debt again. That does not go to meet the total needs that we're going to have financing for the 15 to 19, but at least it gives us a down payment. And so we think that that's an appropriate reinvestment of resources.
Right. Jeff, just Bob, and the entire finance staff deserve an enormous amount of credit. We've been receiving official statements from them from all of our refinancings over the last 4 or 5 months. They have been extremely diligent in taking advantage of the low interest rates so that we could reduce our overall capital costs. The structuring of those savings were done specifically in mind to begin the funding of the new program.
And some of that, I think you mentioned, results in timing as well, of just pushing off expenditures and reforecasting. Lastly, as it relates to the capital plan, I'm not quite sure where you got the breakdown early on about how there could potentially be almost $1 billion of local capital that we won't get reimbursed for.
Sure.
I don't know if that's the 25% share, but I guess my real question is as we start spending the capital dollars, what process are we going to have in place with FEMA to ensure that we don't embark on new capital projects, not in the capital plan, that are not going to be eligible at all? We know that FEMA has says some very nice words, and they have full goals to get us as much money as possible. But as time goes on, things get a little bit more bureaucratic, and projects seem to will certainly slip through, and we will not get reimbursement for it. And I just want to ensure we don't start on something. Now they say, sure, you'll get everything back, but we know with time that doesn't occur.
Right.
Our plan is to propose a capital plan amendment to the board in December that would have the $4.7 billion in repairs. The repairs are pretty clear will be reimbursed to the extent that is allowable. The place where there is some question as to reimbursement would be in the mitigation, and those mitigation items We're not proposing to include in the capital plan yet until we figure out how we would be paying for those.
And FEMA will be pre-approving the list of $5 billion of infrastructure repairs?
Yes.
Great, thanks.
I'd like to note on that, the $4.75 million of infrastructure. This was solely based on the damage that was done by Hurricane Sandy, and at the core of it, it was to determine how do we get the functionality of the system back to where we were the day before the storm hit. And that's really where we're coming from. I didn't say this up front at the beginning of the meeting, and I should. We're not back to normal. We're still on limited service. If you're on the subways, you'll notice they're crowded. We're doing everything we can to get back to normal, but you're seeing longer headways. It's safe. I'm not saying, it is a very safe system, but it's just not at the same level of capacity based on all the things that were broken to get back to there. So, that $4.75 billion is to get back to where we were the day before.
And how quickly can we spend that?
You want
What we're doing, the illustration we gave you said that 60% of that money would be raised and expended beginning this year. 2013, and then the balance, 40% of it would be raised and begun expending in 2014.
Right. Yes, Andrew?
What percent of the infrastructure losses due to Sandy can we expect from FEMA? And do we have a history of how they have responded from Irene on the rebuilding of the Port Jervis branch, for instance?
Mm-hmm. Maureen?
We expect FEMA to provide assistance at 75% of approved project worksheets. There has been a history with FEMA where there have been major disasters where they have increased that percentage to 90 and 100%, but we won't know that yet until we're well into the process, but there is that possibility. FEMA, in our program, will provide our deductible of $25 million as well as assistance of an additional $26 million or so throughout our entire program, as well as fill in above the sublimits that we have for the damages in flood zone A. So it's going to be a whole program to put together.
And FEMA doesn't pay for the loss of operating revenue.
Program.
We don't have any experience with that yet, do we?
We are working on that right now on the Irene claim, and we expect it to be experience. It would be on the loss of revenue would be on a net basis, so the calculation is somewhat complicated. Yeah, obviously. So, yeah.
Alan?
Just a quick comment on just following up what Jay was talking about in terms of the capital plan, and I understand that this is essentially a guidepost, but this past year we participated in once again kicking the can down the road on the capital plan, and now this is several years out, but I would hope that the goodwill and public support that we've received during this time would be spent in Albany during this next year, coming up with a plan that will not strangle us with debt going into the future. So I think that hopefully could be something good that could come out of the aftermath of the storm.
If I missed this, I apologize, but in order to get a more explicit understanding of how we deal with, eventually, with the borrowings that are a consequence of Sandy, what happens to that borrowing after we've been fully reimbursed or find other funds? Does it go away? Does the debt service go away? What?
Yeah, what the plan is, we will sell anticipation notes. The primary repayment source will be the insurance that reimbursement we receive and the federal reimbursement that we receive. And again, if it comes in as expected, that would still leave us short of something. If it's a 75% recovery, that's one thing. If it's a 90% recovery, it becomes a much smaller number. So the debt service on those anticipation notes would go away as we receive reimbursements to pay off those notes. And then it's only the longer-term debt obligation that we would sell to cover what is not reimbursed that would be an ongoing cost for the next 30 years.
So we take it down as we get cash coming back?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. You just said the primary source, but I just want to confirm something we talked about yesterday. The security for the notes, which will be paid down from the proceeds of insurance and FEMA, but the ultimate security will be our traditional sources of security. We're not talking about a new credit, correct?
What we're actually talking about doing is a bond anticipation note for both tri-borough bond anticipation notes for transportation revenue bond. So while we expect that the bonds will be, the notes will be repaid from these reimbursements,
Right.
if necessary, we would be willing to sell bonds to pay off the notes to the extent that they're not reimbursed.
Okay, thanks. And then one quick comment and a quick question. You guys do deserve a lot of praise for the refinancings that are taking advantage of the reduced interest rates in the capital markets. So I never know when the right time to do that is, so I wanted to take the opportunity. My only other quick question is how much of the $4.75 billion is hardening and improvements that we now see are required, and how much is just replacement, or are you unable to say yet?
Most of the money is for normal replacement. You know, the place where there would be hardening would be if new equipment is more resilient than 70-year-old equipment. But for example, under the mitigations, there were things like raising yards or putting barriers up. That's not included in this money. This money is essentially to replace what we've determined has been broken because of Sandy.
And generally, John, I would say it was, you know, as I said before, that this was to put the system back to a level of functionality or operation as the day before. If we have a switch that was 70 years old, it's going to be hard to find somebody, you know, we're not going to replace that switch with one that's 70 years old. We will replace it with one that is new and that is functional. And in that particular case, you know, one could argue, is that a replacement? It's clearly not a hardening. In answer to your question about hardening the system, I would say none of that $4.75 billion is hardening.
It would be inherently unfair and inappropriate to rule that, for example you just gave, as a hardening.
Right, and FEMA is well aware, the federal government in total is well aware of that because of the age of the system and in other disasters that have had that have occurred around the country. Right. Yes, Ms. Myrtle.
To what extent, if any, are the FEMA allocations subject to congressional action and budgetary approval?
We understand right now that there's just slightly under $10 billion in the FEMA fund. So in order to increase the funding for this disaster, Congress would have to appropriate additional funding. But we understand that they're working on that now.
But would it be correct that in order to achieve the goal we seek to achieve, Congress will have to cooperate and provide the funds either in a new budget or otherwise so that that can be done, and that it therefore is important that our congressional delegation join us in moving this forward?
Chuck, there's been meetings with the congressional delegation, both senators and members of the House statewide. The governor has convened these meetings. It's begun the conversations. I've had conversations with both senators on this issue, some members of the House as well. This will be a full court press by the state of New York and the city of New York. No doubt about it.
Yes. Thank you. Bob, could you, there were a lot of numbers that you've just been through. What was the amount that in this overall summary that was attributable to debt service savings? Round numbers.
Well, what we're saying is that the debt service savings, at least in 2015, are approaching about $250 million from those three sources that I mentioned. Savings we've got from the refunding, lower interest rates that we're already experiencing on the new money debt that we're selling, and also the expectation on the debt that we will continue to sell will be significantly lower, and the fact that our cash flow estimates mean that we're not having to fund as soon as we otherwise would.
Yeah. The reason I bring it up is that is not pocket change, and it seems to me that it might be appropriate in finance to discuss the what sounded like a hard rule, that if it was saved in the capital program, it goes back to the capital program. Ultimately, it all, or a lot of it, flows back to the ratepayer. And I think it's a topic that could at least be appropriately discussed there, to say, well, is it really right for us to do that? Because to a certain extent, it seems to me it might be giving funders a pass in the future for capital items, and I think we need to understand where things like financial savings are applied.
I appreciate that. I would point out again that the total amount of funding that we're going to require in the 15 to 19 capital program so greatly exceeds the amount of funding that would be provided by this. But again, I think it shows that we at least are trying to keep our debt service costs down, and when we can do that, to try to see if we can put it back in a way that does not increase further the impact on our riding public. So, but I take the point.
Are there any questions or comments? Okay. In the context of the 13 to 16 financial plan, as we've just discussed, you will have before you the staff summary that Bob presented, recommending the approval by the board of the use of available MTA and TBTA funds to pay for Sandy-related restoration costs and the reimbursement of these funds with the proceeds of tax-exempt borrowings. May I have a motion to approve this item?
Move.
Motion has been moved and it has been seconded. Any questions or comments? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. And now, may I have a motion to convene an executive session to discuss matters pursuant to New York State Public Offices Law, Section 501H, concerning the exchange of securities. Do I have a second? I'll move that. Do we have a second? Item has been seconded. All in favor? Aye. Good morning. Questions?
Out of fares and tolls because of the Sandy?
I'm sorry, say that one more.
Did you discuss at all trying to get more money out of fare and toll increases because of Sandy, or is there any?
Absolutely not.
It wasn't considered, or?
Not an option.
Can you
We're
not
gonna,
get
the burden of Sandy will not be upon our riders, and there was no part of our hearing process incorporated.
or future fare and tolls?
I have enormous amount of government confidence in the federal government that we will receive substantial amount of money to cover what's necessary to get us back to the condition of functionality we had the day before the storm. I feel very comfortable about the process. We are in sorry, I had a root canal yesterday and I can barely talk, so for that I apologize. You probably hear every other word. We're in very preliminary stage of this process. Let's think about this for a second. These numbers were put together 3 weeks after the storm hit. The MTA's done some really good things, actually some great things, so give us an opportunity to catch up with what we need to do here. But we used our best efforts to determine what it is and what it'll take to get us back to that level of functionality. We're continuing to work on that, and it's an evolving process. The process is in the first inning, and there's more to do. But direct answer again to your question, Jennifer, I have a lot of confidence in the federal government and how they have reimbursed in other natural disasters, and I feel very, very comfortable that in connection we will work with them, we will work with the governor's office, we will work with all of the governor's representatives in his office in Washington, as well as with our senators and members of the House to deal with this issue. And this will not be a burden upon our riders.
Mr. Loda, will it impact which particular plan is used for the fare increase?
Nope. No connection whatsoever.
You made a distinction between restoration and the hardening of the system to protect against future storms.
Huge distinction.
Right. And at the same time, I think the example you used there was restoring a 70-year-old switch where it's one of the components that's no longer made, where you would replace it with something that's newer. Do you have a sense now of how much of that restoration, the $4.75 billion, is actually going to be restoring the system and providing some degree of improvement over what was there on the day before the storm?
The simple answer is going to be that almost 100% of the $4.75 billion will be to put the system back into the level of functionality we had the day before Hurricane Sandy hit. To answer your question as to will it be exactly the same light bulb or will it be a newer light bulb, it's impossible to determine. But the $4.75 billion, I keep saying the same thing, $4.75 billion is just to get us back to where we were. It does not include hardening. But I wanted to make that distinction that there are products out there that are new or different from the products that we had. They're the same thing. It's just a new model. And I wanted that distinction to be out there because there was something I read in one of the papers this morning that was turning that concept into hardening. That is not hardening the system. That is just getting us back to the same level of how we were operating the day before in functionality. And I want to restate as well, we are not back to where we were the day before in operations. For those of you who've been on the system, we have longer headways. Not everything is back to normal, and it'll be a while until we're back to normal. But as I said, at the very, very early days of this crisis and this storm, is that we will do everything that we can to come back incrementally. There were days when we created 4 maps in one day because different portions of the system kept opening up during the day, and we'll continue to work that way. We owe it to our customers. We owe it to our riders to do everything we can to get back as fast as we can. And quite honestly, I think the workers, the union workers, the labor management as well, has done an extraordinary job in understanding their responsibilities to our customers.
Mr. Chairman, I hear what you say in regards to the early stages and assessing what's going on up to this point. Can you speak more specifically in regards to South Ferry? It's a large station. It was relatively new at that point. Can you speak to both the damage there and also when you think that might go back online?
I'm going to ask Tom Prendergast to talk a little bit about when it's going to come back online. But South Ferry was destroyed. It wasn't hurt. It wasn't wrecked. It was destroyed from top to bottom. There was 4 foot of water on the street level. It's 20 feet below ground. Everything. There was subway tile, ripped off the walls by virtue of the power of the water pressure that was being put down there. We had the command room in there. It was a control center for the number 1 train. It was completely destroyed. So it's going to take a while to get back. And Tom, if you want to talk about that, then I want to talk about the cost for 1 second.
I think the chairman's highlighted the most important points. It's going to take us weeks to complete an assessment. We had a lot of equipment, a lot of facilities, a lot of integral elements of the system that operate out of there. And it's actually 2 stations in the complex. It's South Ferry and it's Whitehall. The water to the Montague Street Tunnel entered that way, came through Whitehall and then entered and flooded the tunnel. So it's going to take us quite a while to do that assessment and determine how we're going to do it. Just escalators alone, it's a lot. So it's months before it's going to take us weeks to do an assessment, a detailed assessment, and months to do the restoration.
It's our goal to get the Montague Street Tunnel tube open and get the R train running. It's going to have to probably skip that station for a while. Don't interpret the Whitehall station where the R goes through being closed for such a long period of time that that tunnel won't open. We're just going to have to, the next stop, we'll be going from Court Street in Brooklyn, and instead of the next stop being Whitehall, it would be Rector. And it just connect it that way, and it's just a few blocks away. Regarding the cost, because I keep reading about the cost, Mr. Flagenheimer keeps writing about, oh God, how could it be $600 million? 5 years ago, it was determined to be, or it could be Mr. Kaplan, who you're quoting. 5 years ago, it was costed out at $530 million. 5 years ago. Now we've gone back and we've looked at how we're going to replace everything. It was destroyed. If you think about it, the compound annual growth rate for 5 years over that period of time brings you up to about 2.3%, less than the rate of inflation over the same period of time. I encourage you to look at the numbers and look at them from a point of view as when they were determined and where they are. It's not unreasonable that something goes up, the cost of something goes up about the rate of inflation. That's pretty normal in that situation. Pete?
Either way, it looks like that these numbers, you'll have to borrow for, short term, and that your annual costs go 25, 50, 75 million, or whatever the numbers are. I think it's 125 over the next 3 years to borrow the 4.7, 4.8. I know you talked about tolls. Can you assure riders that there won't be any service cuts to help pay for that as well?
I can. It's about expense reductions in the area of finding efficiencies, as Bob mentioned in his presentation. I said this almost a little over a year ago. I really do not want to be involved in service reductions. I will do everything I possibly can to enhance service. I will also do everything I possibly can to prevent service reductions. That was my goal on my first day here. It continues to be my goal.
Mr. Capelli made a point, I think it was Mr. Capelli, about going to Albany and finding a way to support future capital plans that isn't only going out to borrow.
I think
so
it's more than just capital.
Right, right, operating too. So more than, aside from the question about FEMA and federal aid, what exactly is the MTA going to do differently in dealing with the state government to get a more sustainable, stable funding source than the PMT perhaps, and maybe something other than just borrowing for all these capital plans?
I think at the heart of Commissioner Capelli's comments was to see if there's a way that we can look at the disaster and find some way to turn it a little bit and find it a way that we can work better with Albany. And I've seen that already. I've seen members of the legislature who've started to, were amazed with our efficiency in getting back. And I've reiterated to many members of the Assembly and many members of the State Senate that this is not the MTA that they remembered from 5, 6, 7 years ago. This is a completely different run, managed, efficient agency. It may have been efficient back then as well, but the perception that they had then and the perception that they have now should be night and day difference. This is an organization that knew right from the get-go what it needed to do in a disaster, how to do it, and implemented it with, actually we implemented it in such a way that everybody was doing it even before the storm was over. We had people positioned all throughout the system, both on the commuter rail lines and in the subway system. There have been some articles about some of our workers who were trapped at Stillwell Avenue. The reason why they were there is that we needed them there when we got back up and running. We couldn't be in one place and then span all over the 5 boroughs for the subways, or upstate with Metro North, or out in the island with LIRR. So we had people positioned in such a way so we can get back. Bottom line is, and every member of the Senate and the Assembly that I've talked to is more than impressed with the results that we had. I won't lose sight of that as we go to Albany in the new session.
Joe.
Yes, T.Y.
People talk about, you don't appreciate things until you lose them. Do you think the perception of the riding public, is going to change now that they lost having mass transit and now they have it back?
The Quinnipiac poll of a week ago really reiterated that, where I think they said most people thought the response of the MTA and the image of the MTA, I believe it was 75%, was good to excellent. I think that speaks for itself. I do think that. I think we've seen an increase in ridership. I personally have seen a decrease in trash on the system. I think the people understand and appreciate the subway system a whole lot more than they did before Sandy. So I think that the public has responded very, very well to all the things that we have done. And I think the perception of the MTA it's more than just perception. It has changed.
One of the questions that has come up has been about refunds. Are you considering any refund for an unlimited users or train passes?
Greg, we addressed that, and it was part of the discussion that I had at press conferences with the governor, where I said we're giving free days. We gave 2 or 3, depending on buses and subways, for 2 free days. Also, we extended our passes on the railroads till November 5th. Quite honestly, one of the board members today at the board meeting asked us to look at that. I will look at it, but I'm not hopeful that it's going to happen.
Joe, since you brought up the Quinnipiac poll, I'll go here. The board commended you for leading the MTA through this crisis with honor. You've got Rudy Giuliani and countless bloggers saying Joe Lhota should run for mayor in 2013. Will you do that, and are you considering it?
This is an MTA press conference. It's not a political press conference. I'm not going to answer any questions about that. My job is to get this place up and running as best it possibly can, and I think the team is doing a great job. I don't deserve the credit at all for this. The credit belongs to the presidents of each one of the operating agencies, all the way down to the folks who are cleaning the system. They are the ones who brought this system back. They are the ones who deserve all the credit. And unfortunately for all of you, I'm not going to answer any questions whatsoever about politics.
One quick MTA question, which is Bob talked about undisclosed cuts to help close the budget gap. You mentioned you don't want those to be service reductions of any kind. Where, if the MTA is now efficient and lean, where do you get those cuts?
Well, I've been around both private sector and the government for a long enough period of time to know that you never get your foot off the pedal when it comes to making places more efficient. How can you do things at less cost? How can you modernize in a way where you can do it with less number of people? Now, don't interpret that as layoffs. That's not part of it. But what can you do to make the place more efficient? And I've never met an organization, private sector or public sector, that couldn't be more efficient. You have to have your foot on the pedal every day in trying to determine that. We will find those cost cuts. This is not something we do quarterly. This is something we do hourly around here, and we'll continue to do that.
So the capital program is in this era of mega projects. Do you think that with the setback from Sandy, as you plan future capital programs, 5-year programs, this will force you to shrink your vision for capital projects?
The question's a mix of 2 things. These are mega projects that were developed 20 years ago that are being implemented now. I've said this over and over again. I think the future capital programs are going to be to continue some of the mega projects, the continuation of the 2nd Avenue subway. Fulton will be done by the time the new program comes about. The extension of the number 7 train will be finished by the time the new program comes out. But we will, and shortly in the middle of the next plan, East Side Access will open up. We will have the extension of the number 2 train, which is a long term. It's going to go eventually from 125th Street all the way down to Wall Street area and over time. But I do think that what's really important, and I've said this over and over again, this is a 100-year-old system, and to maintain it in a state of good repair, to maintain it to be modern. This is long before we get to what's happened regarding Hurricane Sandy and what do we need to do to prevent the water damage that we receive from this surge. We're going to take that into account. Is it going to change our overall approach? No. We still want to figure out, make sure we build rail lines and bus lines and have our depots in the right places based on the needs of our customers, and we'll continue to do that.
Just on South Ferry, which is apparently my favorite topic, for the sake of reimbursements...
I'm really sorry.
Yeah. For the sake of getting reimbursements, is there some sort of requirement that you replace what has been damaged in a way that might make less sense than sort of rebuilding? Do you have to rebuild South Ferry on the same scale, is what I suppose I'm asking, given...
Have you ever been in South Ferry?
I've been to South Ferry. It's lovely.
Grand scale? Okay.
The $600 million have to go to that, is what I'm asking, in order to get reimbursed for that. And does that make as much sense as perhaps spending that money elsewhere?
It's a major station. It's a connection for the people of Staten Island who take the ferry. It's within 100 feet of there. It's one of the earliest stations in the system, old station. It's at the very tip of Manhattan. It's got critical importance. overall, and it's one that we will look and see what we can do to get it back into the state that it was in the day before the storm hit, and that's our overall goal, is to get it back into that state of functionality.
Sure. Is there an option of spending that money elsewhere if you make a case that it's better suited elsewhere, as far as reimbursements are concerned?
I honestly, I don't understand the question. We've determined it's going to take $600 million to fix something that's been destroyed.
Right.
We are going to take that money and use it to fix what was destroyed and bring it back to the same level of functionality that we had the day before the storm hit.
There's no consideration of taking a station that is below the water table, right at the tip of the battery, where everyone is now saying you should anticipate a lot more of these storms, and saying...
Now, that's a different question. That's a different question. What do we need to do to harden it? And we're nowhere near ready to talk about what it's going to take to do to harden. The governor's put together 3 different commissions, announced last week. They've started meeting. They're going to have reports early in January. They're working through 4 major holidays to determine what is it that we have to do. We, and let me define we. It's not just the MTA. It's all levels of government, federal, state, and local. It's the private sector. The amount of real estate damage that was done in Lower Manhattan is unbelievably significant. We all have to come together to determine what is it that we have to do to protect the city, as well as the region, all the way out on the island, from surges that we experienced. And we need to do that. That'll be the subject of a discussion at another board meeting and at another time when we determine what it is that we need to do collectively. If the MTA just did it on its own, it's just not going to work. It needs to be done in a way that's comprehensive across the board between the governmental sector and the private sector as to what we need to do to protect our properties.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.